Hey, it's Dean Wolfe, doing lots of reactions, but I like to do album reviews too, so let's review Genesis Calling All Stations, coming right up. So now we're going to review the very last studio album that Genesis released, which I just learned about, really. I mean, I've heard about it, of course. I've heard about it in the last year or so. I learned about it. I don't know how the news got by me, but I didn't even realize that, of course, Phil Collins quit the band, and they'd actually sort of tried to kind of reignite Genesis. They had a new singer. I think his name was Ray. His name was Ray Wilson, and he's actually in another band called Stillskin. And since then, he's been pretty active as well. So basically, he was trying to fill Phil Collins' shoes. And of course, Phil Collins filled Peter Gabriel's shoes. And it's so funny that when Peter Gabriel came back, or when Peter Gabriel quit, lots of people didn't like Genesis anymore. And then of course, now when Phil Collins quits, people don't like Genesis anymore. It's just an ongoing sort of soap opera. Let's forget about the soap opera business of Genesis, and let's just think about what they're doing as a band. So I wasn't familiar with this album. I didn't know what to expect. I honestly did not know what to expect. I just sort of had an impression. I think I looked at some reviews ahead of time or heard people talking about the album saying it's underappreciated. It should be appreciated better. You know, it's got some hard knocks just because, because it would, right? But I'm going to tell you why, when I really listen to it, why I understand why it got some hard knocks and why it sort of was hard to get some traction, certainly in America. It did all right in the UK. They had a good successful tour, it looks like, and they sold a decent amount of albums. They sold at least 1 million albums in the not in UK alone, but in the European markets, and that's nothing to sneeze at. But of course, compared to what they were used to, they were like a humongous supergroup, and so Peter Banks and Mike Rutherford, when Phil Collins left, they wanted to sort of pick up on that, I guess. And so anyways, this album is very 80s. It had a real 80s feel to it, even though it sort of had a 90s feel as well. I mean, it was done in the late 90s. I think it was 1997 it came out. Yeah, released September 1st. And it's a long album. It's actually 67 minutes in length, plus seconds, 67 plus 42 seconds, and it's an interesting album. It's actually not that bad. I'm going to tell you why I think it was difficult for them to get traction. I think if they had stuck together and really resolved that no matter what they're going to do 2 albums, 3 albums, I think they should have done that. I don't think trying to pull off Genesis version 3, 3.0 in one album is not going to work. You're going to have to incorporate a new singer. People are going to react. They're not going to buy the album as much. Some people are going to disown the band. That's fine, but you can build on the new foundation of a new band and just sort of grow and build. And it's a shame they didn't do that. I think it was a big mistake for Rutherford and Tony Banks not to stick together, because this new singer they got, he was good. He was a good singer, Ray Wilson. Now, the only reason why I think it would have been really challenging to have Ray as a singer is because Peter Gabriel and Phil Collins are very unique singers. I mean, they have a very oddball kind of timbre in their voices. Oddball, maybe is the wrong word, but you know what I mean. It's just super unique. So whereas the new singer, Ray, his voice was kind of mainstreamish, he had a kind of a slight bit of gravel, very good singer, technically and all that, and there's a few songs in his album he's really singing in a soulful way, especially, and I thought it really shines through in those tunes. But it's just, that's the brand, right? The Genesis brand is a unique, super unique singer, whereas suddenly the Genesis brand had changed to kind of a mainstreamish kind of singer. So not everyone's going to hit off the bat with that, but I believe that the reviews in general always noticed how he was a fine singer, and there really was no, they couldn't criticize the singer. You can't really criticize them. I think what can be criticized about this album was some of the songs were very bland. Just not all of them. It's just a very small minority, I would say. There was a few tracks, for example, a song called Shipwrecked and Not About Us, Not About Us was a sort of a ballady song, has a boring, very boring acoustic guitar intro, and the whole song has a written by a committee of songwriters feel to it. That was the vibe. It was not up to the standard of Genesis. And to me, Genesis, they are one of, well, let's look at it this way, okay? all these bands that were progressive in the 70s who succeeded in the 80s, for example, yes, Asia, well, Asia was a new band, but Genesis especially, what they did is they brought pop rock to epic levels. So suddenly pop rock wasn't just pop rock, it was epic pop rock or epic pop. And there's something about Genesis, they always do that. And that should be the standard, that should be the bar, that should be the tier, you know. They should have looked at this album when they released it and said, you know, this song, the ones I just mentioned, for example, not epic. And it doesn't have to be loud to be epic. It can be subtle to be epic too. You can be subtly epic. And they didn't really quite meet the standard. And I've read in an interview or some reference to an interview with Tony Banks that they left a couple songs off that they should have put on, and they put on a couple songs that they should have left off. So some mistakes were made. But what do you expect? It's the first time. They should have stuck it out for 2 or 3 albums, ironed things out, and they would have been full force ahead. I think it would have been really cool. So let's talk about some of the songs that are great. And overall, too, I really did enjoy the album. It does increasingly get better with repeat listens. The first listen is not as good. And that's a sign, a real good sign, that an album is good, because I think that's just the way it should be. You should listen to an album and not get it all at first, because if it's really fresh, if it's in a new direction, that's just the kind of how you're going to react to it. Unless you're super intuitive empath or whatever, and you know, oh yeah, this is like cutting edge, this is great. A lot of us are just going to hear it and sort of it's going to glaze over, and we're not going to realize the brilliance that's occurring. So there are some brilliant moments in this album. A gorgeous chord change, for example, in the title track. That Tony Banks plays, just gorgeous. I mean, the title track's fantastic. There's another track I really loved a lot too. It's called There Must Be Some Other Way. Another favorite track of mine on that album. And it's an 8-minute track too, and it's really cool, and some great singing there. Yeah, there's just so much potential here, but like I say, there were a few lame ducks on the album, but even despite that, melodically speaking, the album really does hold well together. Rutherford and Banks craft some great melodies, and I think that the new singer had some input as well, although he said he didn't have a lot of input, but certainly he was credited on 3 songs for songwriting, and so he did have some influence on the band. Would have been curious to hear what would have gone, how it would have gone if he'd stayed with the band. So there are some tracks where you hear Phil Collins' Ghost, you know, with that 80s production magic, like him and Hugh Padgham sort of crafted and perfected that drum sound, you know, the ambient lively drum sound. Great stuff. There's a few tracks in this album, and you kind of expect that with Genesis, you know, coming out of the 80s. It's just, you expect, yeah, that's just something you expect with Genesis. So they did honor that. They kept that kind of lively drum sound, and that's great. I have no problem with that. One thing I did get thinking when I was listening to this album is, you know, Rutherford as a bass player. I remember in the early 70s work with Genesis, I was thinking, man, Rutherford is undercredited as a bassist. He should be right up there with Chris Squire. The stuff he's doing, the tones he's playing, amazing bass lines. What happened? On this album, for example, listen to his bass playing. He's just sticking to the root notes. Do 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 do. Like what? What the heck, Mike? You were like a top tier bassist, and then you just drop down there to be a sort of a mediocre bass player. I mean, he's more than mediocre. He's a solid bassist. I'm not going to lie and exaggerate. He's a solid bassist. What he does is solid, but there was so much imagination he used to play with. I don't know what happened to that. I guess he's putting it into other aspects of Genesis. He's focused on, he can't just focus on bass alone. So anyways, so they had a couple drummers on this album. Of course, they had Spock's Beard drummer Nick DiVirgilio, and they also had Nir Zedayuka. I don't know. So it's some wild name there. So nice drumming, fine drumming. The guitar work, there was a few. The title track has a very slightly unpleasant guitar tone. I don't know what happened there again. Rutherford's taste in guitar tones is not the best on a couple tracks on this album. It kind of hindered the track just a slight bit, but overall it doesn't drag it down too much, thankfully. So what do I say overall? The Prog Dog score, 3 bones out of 5. Yes, there's some 80s Genesis feel, there's 90s Genesis feel, there's no 70s. If you're looking for 70s feel of a Genesis album, that's not here. If you're an 80s fan, you're going to like it. If you're open to a new singer, you're going to like it. You should enjoy it. You might be surprised. It's really not garbage. You can't just say, "Oh, this is garbage." I'm not going to give it 1 star or 1 bone. I mean, Prog Dog, think, this. I wouldn't, if I saw this CD used, I'd get it. I wouldn't pay full price. I wouldn't go pay like $30 for a CD, or I might pay a decent amount for vinyl, because it's actually a pretty cool album. You can't deny it, I think. But anyways, it is a memento of Genesis and what they could have been. I think they should have stuck together for a couple more albums. It's a shame they didn't. So that's my review. If you have any comments that you'd like to leave below concerning this album, Genesis, how you feel about the singing, how you thought the songwriting was, how you thought the performances were of the band playing keyboards, how the performances were playing guitar, how the performances were playing bass. What are your thoughts on that? How did you like the drummers? And did you enjoy the kind of carryover from the 80s, or do you think it was too much 80s sound? I'm just curious what you think. Leave your comments below. Spanishing out. What am I thinking of spanishing out? Spiraling out. It's Dean. Talk to you all later. Bye.